The longship's hull creaked against the icy waters of the North Sea as Njord's wrath cut through the dawn fog like a blade through flesh. At the prow, Nyssa Freysdottir stood unflinching, her wheat-coloured hair whipping against her face like the tails of Sleipnir. The year was 872, and the coast of Northumbria loomed in the distance, promising both blood and bounty. "We approach, my lady," said Hagel, her father's oldest friend and most trusted warrior. His beard, once fiery as Thor's lightning, had faded to the color of old bone, but his sword arm remained strong. "Then let them hear our coming," Nyssa replied, her voice carrying over the rhythmic splash of oars. She wore a blue wool dress beneath her leather armor, silver arm rings marking her status, and around her neck hung her mother's amber pendant, protection against evil spirits and reminder of what she had lost. She unsheathed her sword, its pattern-welded blade catching the first true light of day. The men behind her, 40 strong, raised their weapons and shields in response, a thunderous battle cry rising from their throats to honor their Jarl's daughter. None knew that this raid was not merely for plunder. For Nyssa, it was the beginning of a hunt that would end with her sword in the heart of Ragnar Palgerson, the man who had slaughtered her father and brothers while they slept during the winter feast. "May the Allfather guide our blades," she whispered to herself as the ship cut toward the shore. Far to the north, in the rocky fjords of Vestfold, Ragnar Palgerson sat upon the high seat that had once belonged to Jarl Freyr. The hall around him buzzed with the voices of men sworn to his service, their bellies full of mead and boasts. Firelight glinted off the gold arm rings he had taken from Freyr's corpse and the carved dragons that adorned the pillars of the great hall. "A toast," called out Ragnar, raising his drinking horn. The men fell silent. "To victory and to Odin, who blessed our swords against our enemies." The hall erupted in cheers, but Torvald, Ragnar's brother, leaned close to whisper in his ear. "There is talk from our traders in the south. The daughter lives." Ragnar's hand tightened around his horn. "Impossible. I saw her fall. She was found by fishermen, nursed back to health. She has gathered a warband from those still loyal to her father." Ragnar's face remained impassive, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. "Then she will join her family in hell soon enough." What neither man knew was that Nyssa had already set her plan in motion, one that would shake the foundations of Vestfold and beyond. The raid on the monastery went as raids often did, swift, brutal, efficient. Monks scattered like startled birds before the Norse blades, some fleeing into the surrounding forest, others kneeling in prayer even as death came for them. Nyssa led her warriors with cold precision, directing them toward the treasures while keeping casualties to a minimum. "Take what can be carried," she ordered. "No unnecessary killing." Strange words from a daughter of Freyr the Red, muttered Gunnar, a barrel-chested warrior with a scarred face. "Your father would have bathed this place in blood." Nyssa fixed him with a stare cold as midwinter ice. "My father is dead because he made too many enemies. I do not intend to repeat his mistakes." As her warriors stripped the monastery of its gold crosses and silver reliquaries, Nyssa found herself in the scriptorium. A young monk cowered behind an oak table, clutching a half-finished manuscript to his chest. "Please," he said in broken Norse, surprising her. "This is the work of a lifetime." Nyssa studied him, brown hair cropped close to his head, eyes the color of summer sky, fear evident in every line of his body. Yet he did not beg for his life, only for his work. "What is your name?" she asked. "Rorik," he answered. "Rorik of Lindisfarne. You speak our tongue well for a Christian. I was captured as a boy during a raid, lived among your people for 5 winters before being ransomed back." Something about his calm amid the chaos intrigued her. An idea formed, dangerous, perhaps foolish, but potentially useful. "Gather your writings, Rorik of Lindisfarne. You're coming with us." His eyes widened. "As a slave. As a valuable asset. One who knows both worlds." She leaned closer. "Unless you prefer to stay and explain to your brothers why you alone were spared." Confusion and fear warred in his expression, but survival won out. He nodded and gathered his precious manuscripts. As they returned to the ships, laden with plunder, Hagel approached her. "A prisoner?" he asked, eyeing Rorik suspiciously. "A translator," Nyssa corrected. And someone who can teach me the ways of the Christians. If we are to navigate the changing tides, we must understand those who worship the white Christ. Hegel frowned beneath his graying beard. Your father would have killed him without thought, she finished. And that is why my father's bones lie unavenged while Ragnar sits in his hall. She secured her sword to her belt. We sail with the tide. The real work begins now. The journey back to their temporary settlement on the eastern coast took 3 days. 3 days in which Rorik kept to himself, huddled beneath a wool cloak, watching the Vikings with wary eyes. Nyssa observed him from a distance, noting how he seemed to be memorizing their faces, their customs, their ways. On the 3rd night, as they made camp on a sheltered beach, she approached him as he sat apart from the others, staring into the darkness. You should eat, she said, offering him a wooden bowl of fish stew. He accepted it with reluctant hands. Why have you really brought me? Nyssa settled beside him on the driftwood log. I need someone who understands the Christian kingdoms, their alliances, their weaknesses. To raid them more effectively. Bitterness edged his voice. To forge something new. She looked out at the moonlit sea. The world is changing, Rorik. Rome sends its priests further north each year. The kings of England grow stronger. And my people. She hesitated. We are trapped in old ways that lead only to death. Rorik studied her face in the firelight. What do you want from me? Information. Knowledge. In exchange for your life and eventually your freedom. And if I refuse? She met his gaze steadily. Then you are of no use to me. The threat hung between them, clear yet unspoken. After a long moment, Rorik nodded. I will help you if you swear by your gods to spare innocent lives when possible. Nyssa extended her hand, an unusual gesture among her people. By Thor's hammer and Odin's wisdom, I swear it. He clasped her forearm in the warrior's grip she offered, his touch surprisingly firm for a man of God. Neither could have known then how this alliance would alter the fate of kingdoms. The settlement at Ravborg was modest compared to the great halls of Vestfold, a collection of longhouses protected by a wooden palisade, nestled between forest and sea. But it was here that Nyssa had gathered those still loyal to her father's memory, building her strength in secret over the past 2 years. As they entered the gates, children ran to greet returning warriors while women assessed the plunder with practical eyes. Nyssa led Rorik toward the central longhouse, aware of the curious stares following them. Inside, the fire pit cast dancing shadows across carved posts and hanging shields. A one-eyed man rose from beside the flames, Thorvald's scarred face, her father's schooled and keeper of the settlement's laws. The raid was successful, he asked, embracing Nyssa in welcome. Enough silver to trade for iron and grain before winter, she confirmed. And this, she gestured to Rorik, is our guest. He will be treated with respect. Thorvald's remaining eye narrowed. A Christian under our roof? The gods sent him to us, Nyssa cut in, her voice hardening. Or would you question their will? The old man hesitated, then bowed his head slightly. As you say, Jarl's daughter. That night, after Rorik had been given a place to sleep, separate from the others but under guard, Nyssa called her closest advisors to council. The time has come, she told them, her voice low in the dimly lit room. Ragnar grows complacent on my father's throne. Our spies say he has alienated many of the coastal jarls with his greed. Hegel leaned forward, the firelight etching deep lines into his weathered face. Your meaning? We sail for Vestfold at summer's end. Not as raiders, but as liberators. She unrolled a leather map on the table between them. With alliances from these 3 settlements, we will have enough warriors to challenge Ragnar's claim. Silence fell as the implications sank in. You mean to take your father's place, said Thorvald finally. No woman has ever ruled as Jarl in Vestfold. Then it is time for change. Nyssa's hand rested on the hilt of her sword. Unless any here believe I lack the strength or will to lead. None challenged her, though doubt shadowed some faces. What of the Christian? Asked Inga, a shield maiden who had trained alongside Nyssa since childhood. He knows the southern kingdoms, their politics, their weaknesses. If Ragnar seeks allies among them, we must understand our enemy. Nyssa traced a line along the coast on the map. And there is something else. Something my mother once told me before she died. All leaned closer, for Nyssa rarely spoke of her mother, a woman some whispered had the sight. She said that the future of our people lies not in raid and plunder, but in trade and settlement. That those who adapt to the changing world will survive, while those who cling to old ways will perish like autumn leaves. The words hung heavy in the air, heretical to some ears, prophetic to others. Think on this, Nyssa said, rising from her seat. We meet again in 3 days to decide our course. As the council dispersed, she found herself alone by the fire, watching the flames dance as her ancestors had for countless generations. The weight of her ambition pressed upon her shoulders like a fur mantle soaked with seawater. Outside, the night was clear and cold, stars scattered across the sky like silver dropped on black velvet. Nyssa stepped into the darkness, seeking the solitude that had been her only comfort since her family's murder. A movement caught her eye, Rorik, standing at the edge of the settlement, gazing upward at the same stars. "Your gods or mine?" she asked, approaching him. He started at her voice but didn't flee. "The same stars shine over all of us, regardless of which gods we believe placed them there." A diplomatic answer. "I've survived this long by choosing my words carefully." He turned to face her fully. "Why have you really brought me here, Nyssa Freysdottir? There are others who could translate for you, others who know the Christian lands." She considered lying, then decided against it. This man had little reason to trust her, she would give him one. "Because you have lived in both worlds. You understand what few do, that there is wisdom to be found beyond one's own people." She gestured toward the settlement. "I would build something different here. Something that might survive the coming changes." "And what changes do you foresee?" "The Christian kings grow stronger. They learn from each defeat, unite against a common enemy. Meanwhile, my people fight amongst themselves, raid for temporary wealth rather than lasting power." She sighed. "We are like children fighting over scraps while ignoring the feast that could be had through trade and alliance." Rorik studied her with new interest. "These are dangerous thoughts among your kind." "As dangerous as mercy would be among yours," she countered. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Perhaps we are both heretics in our own way." For the first time since her family's death, Nyssa felt something lighten within her, the recognition of a kindred spirit, however unlikely. "Rest, monk. Tomorrow we begin your true purpose here." "Which is?" "Teaching me everything about the southern kingdoms, their strengths, their weaknesses, and most importantly, who among them might ally with a Viking queen." His eyebrows rose. "Queen? You aim high." "I aim for survival," she corrected. "For my people and for a future that doesn't end with all of us in shallow graves or enslaved to foreign kings." As she walked away, she felt his gaze following her, curious, wary, and perhaps a little intrigued. The summer days lengthened as Nyssa's plans took shape. Under Rorik's guidance, she learned of the complex alliances between Mercia, Wessex, and the smaller kingdoms. He taught her rudimentary Latin and the fundamentals of Christian thought, while she instructed him in proper Norse sword techniques, knowledge she insisted would keep him alive if they were attacked. A monk with a sword, he had laughed during their first lesson. "My abbot would have me scourging myself for a month." "Your abbot isn't here," she'd replied, adjusting his grip on the wooden practice blade. "And dead monks teach nothing." Their lessons often drew an audience, Vikings curious about the strange Christian who spoke their tongue and seemed increasingly comfortable in their midst. Children especially flocked to him, fascinated by his stories of distant Rome and the strange magic of written words. One evening, as summer's heat gave way to the first cool breath of autumn, Nyssa found Rorik seated outside the longhouse, surrounded by a circle of wide-eyed children. He was showing them how to form letters in the dirt with a stick. "This is how you write shipped in Latin," he was saying as she approached. The children scrambled to their feet at the sight of her, bowing their heads respectfully before scattering like startled birds. You've charmed them thoroughly, she observed, settling beside him on the bench. Children are the same everywhere, he replied, curious and unburdened by the prejudices of their elders. He brushed away the Latin letters with his foot. Your people value knowledge more than I expected. We are not the mindless beasts your Christian chronicles paint us to be. There was no anger in her voice, merely statement of fact. We trade as far as Constantinople, navigate by stars that your wisest men cannot name, and craft ships that can cross oceans your people fear to sail. And yet you raid monasteries for gold rather than the knowledge they contain, he pointed out. Gold buys food for hungry winters. Knowledge is a luxury of the well-fed. She leaned back, watching the sunset paint the clouds in shades of fire. Though perhaps it needn't be so. Rorik studied her profile, the strong line of her jaw softened by the evening light. You are unlike any Norse I have met. Because I'm a woman. Because you look to the horizon rather than the next meal. His voice had softened. It's rare in any people, that kind of vision. Something in his tone made her turn to meet his gaze. For a moment, they were not captor and captive, Viking and Christian, but simply two people sharing the same sunset. The moment broke when Hegel approached, his expression grave. Scouts have returned, he said. Ragnar's ships have been sighted along the coast. 3 vessels, heading north. Nyssa stood immediately. How far? A day's sail. They don't appear to be searching, merely patrolling. Or so they want us to think. She turned to Rorik. Come. We need your knowledge now more than ever. Inside the council room, maps were spread across the table as warriors gathered. Nyssa outlined what they knew. Ragnar had been expanding his influence southward, forcing loyalty from smaller settlements through threat of violence. If he discovers us here before we're ready to strike, all is lost, she concluded. Then perhaps, Rorik suggested carefully, it's time to implement the strategy we discussed. All eyes turned to him, then back to Nyssa. You would trust the Christians' counsel in matters of war? Asked Gunnar, suspicion evident in his voice. I would trust useful counsel regardless of its source, Nyssa replied evenly. She nodded to Rorik. Explain. Ragnar expects you to behave as a Viking, to seek vengeance through direct confrontation. It's why he patrols with 3 ships when one would suffice. Rorik pointed to the map. But what if you approached from a direction he doesn't expect? Not as a warrior seeking blood vengeance, but as a trader bringing valuable alliances. Murmurs rose from the assembled council. You suggest I enter Vestfold openly? Nyssa asked, intrigued despite herself. With gifts and trade goods, accompanied by representatives from allied settlements. Come not as a threat to his power, but as a valuable asset he would be foolish to reject. Rorik traced a route on the map. Meanwhile, your warriors could approach by land, through the forests, ready to strike if needed. Silence fell as they considered his words. It has merit, Hegel admitted reluctantly. Ragnar is greedy. The promise of wealth and new trade routes might indeed lower his guard. And when I stand before him? Nyssa asked. What then? Rorik met her gaze steadily. You offer him a choice, acknowledge you as your father's rightful heir with control over these southern territories, or face the combined might of your allies. And if he chooses war, then you give him war. Rorik's voice hardened. But on your terms, not his. The council erupted in debate, some arguing for traditional methods, others seeing wisdom in the monk's strategy. Throughout it all, Nyssa watched Rorik, the way he held his ground despite being surrounded by warriors who could kill him with a single blow, the careful precision of his arguments, the flash of intelligence in his eyes. When had the frightened monk become this confident advisor? And when had she begun to respect his counsel above others? Later, as the council dispersed to prepare for the journey north, Nyssa found Rorik standing alone by the shore, watching the moonlight silver the waves. Your plan carries great risk, she said, coming to stand beside him. Less than facing Ragnar's forces at sea, he replied. You said yourself that he commands more ships than you. True enough. She studied his profile. Why help me? I took you from your monastery, made you captive. He was silent for a long moment before answering. When I was a boy, after Vikings took me from Lindisfarne, I lived with a family in a settlement not unlike this one. The Jarl there was a fair man who treated his people with respect. Under him, Christians and Norse lived side by side, trading, learning from each other. What happened? Men like Ragnar happened. They raided the settlement, killed the Jarl and many others. They had no interest in coexistence, only plunder. His eyes met hers. I see in you the same wisdom that Jarl possessed. The understanding that there can be strength in difference, not just conflict. His words touched something deep within her, recognition, perhaps, of the path her mother had once spoken of. If we succeed, she said slowly, would you stay? Not as captive, but as advisor. Surprise flickered across his features. You would trust a Christian at your council table. I would trust Rorik of Lindisfarne, who has proven his worth. She held his gaze. The choice would be yours. The implications hung between them, heavy with possibility. Let us survive Ragnar first, he said finally. Then we can discuss the future. As they stood there under the vast canopy of stars, something shifted between them, fragile as new ice in spring, but with the potential to bear significant weight. Neither spoke of it, but both felt the change as surely as the turning of seasons. The journey to Vestfold took 12 days, 6 by ship along the coast, and 6 more by horse and foot through forest paths seldom travelled. Nyssa led a party of 20, including Rorik and representatives from 3 allied settlements, each bringing tribute and trade goods. Meanwhile, Hagel led 60 warriors through the dense woods that bordered Ragnar's territories, moving silently as the wolves that haunted the northern reaches. As they approached Vestfold, signs of Ragnar's rule became evident: increased patrols along the roads, farmsteads abandoned after failing to pay his excessive taxes, gallows displaying the bodies of those who had defied him. He rules through fear, Nyssa observed as they passed the rotting corpse of a man hanging at a crossroads. That is not strength, but weakness disguised. Yet effective, Rorik noted grimly. These people are cowed. For now. She adjusted her cloak, finer than her usual attire, befitting a Jarl's daughter coming in peace. At her throat gleamed her mother's amber pendant, and upon her arms shone silver rings of authority. Fear lasts only until someone offers hope. They arrived at Vestfold's main settlement as the sun began its descent. The place had grown since Nyssa had last seen it, new longhouses stretching beyond the old boundaries, a sturdy wall now encircling the perimeter, ships lining the harbour that her father had expanded before his death. Guards stopped them at the gates, spears lowered with suspicion. State your business, demanded the largest, a man with a scar bisecting his right eyebrow. I am Nyssa Freysdottir, daughter of Jarl Freyr, come to pay tribute to Jarl Ragnar and discuss mutually beneficial trade agreements. She gestured to the laden horses behind her. We bring gifts from the southern settlements. The guards exchanged glances, recognition dawning in their eyes. Wait here, the scarred one ordered before disappearing inside. Nyssa remained motionless, though her heart pounded like a war drum. This was the moment their plan would succeed or fail. If Ragnar ordered her killed immediately, no amount of hidden warriors would save her. Rorik stood slightly behind her, dressed in Norse clothing but with his tonsure still visible, a calculated decision to present him as a valuable translator rather than a slave or prisoner. Courage, he murmured, so softly only she could hear. The gate swung open before them. The scarred guard returned, accompanied by a tall man with a greying beard and cold eyes that Nyssa recognized, Torvald, Ragnar's brother and chief advisor. Nyssa Freysdottir, he said, voice thick with disbelief. We thought you dead these past 3 winters. The Norns had other plans for me, she replied evenly. And now you return, bearing gifts rather than a sword. Suspicion dripped from every word. I return bearing opportunity. She met his gaze without flinching. The southern settlements thrive under my guidance. We have established new trade routes with the Frankish kingdoms that could benefit Vestfold as well. Torvald's eyes narrowed, then shifted to Rorik. You bring a Christian to our gates. I bring a translator who facilitates our trade with Christian lands, she corrected. His knowledge has proved invaluable. A long moment passed as Torvald weighed his options. Finally, he stepped aside. Jarl Ragnar will see you. Your men may enter, but their weapons stay with the guards. Nyssa nodded her agreement, knowing that Hagel and his warriors were already positioning themselves in the forests overlooking the settlement. If things went poorly, they would strike at nightfall. They were led through familiar streets now made strange by time and new construction. Nyssa felt eyes upon her, curious, fearful, hopeful. She walked with her head high, allowing the people to see her face clearly, to recognize the daughter of their former Jarl. Whispers followed in her wake like leaves chasing the wind. The great hall loomed before them, its wooden walls carved with images of gods and heroes, its roof crowned with dragon heads that seemed to snarl at all who approached. Inside, firelight cast dancing shadows across benches filled with warriors and advisors. And there, seated upon the high seat that had once been her father's, was Ragnar Palgerson. He had aged since she had last seen him, his once black beard now streaked with silver, lines etched deeper around his eyes. But the cold calculation in those eyes remained unchanged as he watched her approach. So, he said, his voice carrying easily through the hushed hall. The little she-wolf returns to her father's hall, her tail between her legs. Several of his men laughed, though the sound held little mirth. Nyssa stopped at a respectful distance, neither too close to suggest threat nor too far to suggest fear. I return bringing prosperity, Jarl Ragnar. She gestured to the gifts being laid before the high seat, silver arm rings, amber, fine furs, and 2 ornate swords of Frankish make. The southern settlements have flourished under guidance that favors trade over conflict. And you expect me to believe you harbor no ill will for your father's death? Ragnar leaned forward, skepticism plain on his face. That you come in peace rather than vengeance. I come for the future, not the past. The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but she maintained her composure. 3 years I have spent building alliances with the southern jarls and establishing trade with the Frankish kingdoms. Now I offer Vestfold a share in this prosperity. Murmurs rippled through the hall. Ragnar silenced them with a raised hand. And what do you ask in return for such generosity? The word dripped with suspicion. Recognition of my right to govern the southern territories as my father's heir, and a formal alliance between our settlements. She met his gaze steadily. Our people gain nothing from fighting amongst ourselves while the Christian kingdoms grow stronger. Ragnar's eyes narrowed, then shifted to Rorik. And this taunts you, dog? Is he your advisor or your bedmate? Laughter erupted from his men, but Nyssa didn't flinch. He is a valuable translator who understands the ways of the southern kingdoms. His knowledge has opened doors that would otherwise remain closed to our traders. A clever pet, then. Ragnar rose from the high seat, descending the steps to circle Nyssa slowly. You speak of trade and prosperity, yet I wonder what truly beats in your heart, daughter of Freya. She remained still as he moved around her, aware that this was as much performance for his men as it was assessment of her intentions. I wonder, he continued, stopping directly before her, if you remember the night your family died. The hall fell silent. I remember everything, she replied, her voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. I remember the feast, the songs, the mead flowing freely. I remember how you embraced my father as a brother before plunging your knife into his heart. Ragnar smiled coldly. Yet here you stand, offering alliance rather than challenge. Either you are a coward or you play a deeper game. I am my father's daughter, she said simply. I do what benefits our people. For a long moment, Ragnar studied her face, searching for weakness or deception. Then, to the surprise of many, he laughed. You have your mother's guile, I'll grant you that. He returned to the high seat. You and your Christian may remain as my guests while I consider your proposal. 3 days I will give you, to convince me of the value of this alliance. Relief washed through her, though she allowed none of it to show on her face. 3 days was precisely what they needed. You honor me with your hospitality, she said with a formal bow. As they were led to the quarters prepared for them, under guard, naturally, Rorik leaned close to whisper, he suspects a trap. Of course he does, she murmured back. but his greed outweighs his caution. Already I see the calculation in his eyes, how he might use our trade routes for his own gain. And our real plan proceeds as arranged. Hegel will have positioned our warriors by now. She glanced at the setting sun visible through a window. 2 nights from now, when the feast is at its height, we strike. What neither of them knew was that Torvald stood in the shadows just beyond, catching fragments of their whispered exchange, enough to raise his suspicions, but not enough to uncover the full extent of their plan. That night, a feast was held, ostensibly to welcome Nyssa and her companions, though in reality to allow Ragnar to assess her strength and support. She was seated in a place of honor near the high seat, with Rorik beside her to advise on matters of protocol. The hall blazed with firelight, the air thick with the smell of roasted meat, spilled mead, and unwashed bodies. Skald sang of ancient battles, warriors boasted of their deeds, and through it all, Nyssa observed the political currents flowing through the room. The man to Ragnar's left, she murmured to Rorik during a particularly loud song, is Otter, son of Ketil. He holds lands to the north and has no love for Ragnar, though he hides it well. How can you tell? The way he drinks from his cup after each of Ragnar's boasts, to hide his expression. She nodded subtly toward another man further down the table. And there sits Grim One Hand. He was loyal to my father and barely conceals his contempt now. Throughout the evening, she noted who might be potential allies and who were Ragnar's devoted followers. The information would prove crucial in the days to come. As the feast wore on, Ragnar called for Nyssa to speak of her trading ventures, a request she fulfilled with carefully crafted stories that emphasized the wealth to be gained while minimizing the military implications. The Frankish lord at Rouen trades silver for our furs at twice the rate of previous years, she explained. And with our monk's help in translation, we avoid the misunderstandings that often lead to bloodshed. Ragnar's eyes gleamed with undisguised greed. And these trade routes, they are secure. As secure as any in these times, she replied. Though they would be more so with Vestfold's warriors helping to protect them. The evening progressed with this delicate dance of words and implications, each side probing the other's defenses while maintaining the facade of hospitality. Later, as the feast began to wind down, Ragnar approached where Nyssa sat. Walk with me, he commanded rather than requested. With a glance at Rorik that warned him to remain alert, she followed Ragnar out of the hall and into the cool night air. They walked in silence until they reached a viewpoint overlooking the harbor, where Ragnar's longships rocked gently at their moorings. Your father was a fool, Ragnar said abruptly. He believed in honor and old ways that have no place in changing times. Nyssa bit back the surge of anger his words provoked. Yet you speak of him now. To understand if his daughter shares his weaknesses. Ragnar turned to face her fully, his expression impossible to read in the moonlight. You speak of trade and alliances, using a Christian as your mouthpiece. These are not the methods of a traditional Jarl. The world changes. We must change with it or perish. On that, we agree. He studied her for a long moment. Perhaps there is a place for you in Vestfold after all. As what? She asked cautiously. As my wife. The proposal struck her like a physical blow, though she maintained her composure. You suggest I marry my father's killer. I suggest a union that would bring peace to our people and prosperity to both our territories. His voice was matter-of-fact, devoid of emotion. Your southern trade routes combined with my northern ones would create an empire unrivaled in these lands. And what of vengeance? You expect me to set aside my family's blood. I expect you to be practical, as your words tonight suggested you are. He moved closer, his bulk intimidating in the darkness. Think on it. Would you rather be a queen beside me or a corpse beneath the earth? The threat was unmistakable. I will consider your proposal, she said carefully. Do that. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Nyssa? Keep your Christian pet on a short leash. Some here would gladly see his throat cut, and I might not always be inclined to prevent it. With that, he strode back toward the hall, leaving her alone with the weight of his words and the cold light of stars overhead. When she returned to their quarters, a small building near the main hall, guarded discreetly but unmistakably, she found Rorik waiting anxiously. "What did he want?" he asked as soon as the door closed behind her. "He offered me marriage." She sank onto a bench, suddenly exhausted. Rorik's expression shifted from concern to shock. "Marriage? To the man who murdered your family? A political alliance. He cares nothing for me, only for the trade routes and connections I control." She ran a hand through her hair, loosening the braids that had grown tight against her scalp. "It changes nothing of our plan." "It changes everything," Rorik argued, lowering his voice as he sat beside her. "If you accept, you could gain his trust, position yourself to take control without bloodshed. And share his bed? Bear his children?" The revulsion in her voice was unmistakable. "I would rather die on my sword." Something flickered in Rorik's eyes, relief, perhaps, though he quickly masked it. "Then we proceed as planned. But we must be more careful now, Ragnar will be watching you closely." "Us," she corrected. "He threatened you specifically." Concern crossed Rorik's features. "Me? Why?" "Because he sees how I value your counsel." She hesitated, then added, "And perhaps because he senses there is more between us than captor and captive." The words hung in the air between them, acknowledging what neither had dared speak aloud during the months of their alliance. Rorik's voice was barely above a whisper when he finally responded. "Is there?" Instead of answering directly, Nyssa reached out slowly, her fingers brushing against his hand where it rested on the bench. "In another life, perhaps. One where you were not a monk and I not sworn to vengeance." He turned his hand to clasp hers. "We make our own fates, Nyssa. Even the Norns you believe in weave with threads we provide." For a moment, they sat in silence, the simple contact of their hands speaking volumes that words could not express. Then, reluctantly, Nyssa withdrew. "Rest," she said, rising from the bench. "Tomorrow we continue our performance, and the next day, we end Ragnar's rule forever." The following day passed in a carefully orchestrated display of cooperation. Nyssa toured Ragnar's shipyards, praising improvements while noting defenses. She spoke with merchants in the marketplace, subtly gauging which remained loyal to her father's memory. All the while, Rorik remained at her side, his presence both practical and, increasingly, a comfort. As evening approached, they received word that Ragnar expected them for a private meal in his quarters, an unusual honor that immediately raised their suspicions. "A trap?" Rorik suggested as they prepared. "Perhaps." Or a genuine attempt to discuss his proposal away from prying ears. Nyssa fastened a small knife to her forearm, hidden beneath her sleeve. "Either way, we attend." Ragnar's private chambers occupied the upper level of the Great Hall, accessible by a stairway guarded by his most trusted men. Inside, they found a space that reflected its occupant, richly furnished with plunder from raids, yet lacking the subtle touches that had made it welcoming when Nyssa's father ruled. Ragnar himself awaited them, seated at a table laden with food and drink. To Nyssa's surprise, Torvald was also present, his calculating gaze following them as they entered. "Sit," Ragnar commanded, gesturing to the benches. "We have much to discuss." The meal began with formal exchanges, discussions of weather and harvests that masked the underlying tensions. But as the mead flowed, Ragnar grew more direct. "Have you considered my proposal?" he asked Nyssa bluntly. "I have," she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "Such an alliance would indeed bring benefits to both our territories. Yet I sense hesitation." He leaned forward. "Speak plainly, daughter of Freya." "Plainly, then. How can I trust the man who slaughtered my family? What assurance would I have that I wouldn't meet the same fate once my usefulness ended?" Torvald snorted into his mead. "She has you there, brother." Ragnar shot him an irritated glance before turning back to Nyssa. "A valid concern. Perhaps a gesture of goodwill would ease your mind." "What gesture?" "Blood price." He reached beneath the table and produced a small chest, which he pushed toward her. gold for your father and brothers, acknowledging the debt. Nyssa opened the chest to find it filled with arm rings, silver coins, and amber. A fortune by any measure, yet a paltry sum for 3 lives. Gold cannot restore the dead, she said carefully. No, but it can secure the future of the living. Ragnar's eyes shifted to Rorik. Your Christian seems troubled by our discussion. Indeed, Rorik had grown increasingly tense, his hand never straying far from the small knife hidden at his belt, a precaution Nyssa had insisted upon despite his initial reluctance to bear weapons. He understands the weight of such decisions, Nyssa replied. In his faith as in ours, oaths of marriage are sacred. Sacred, Torvald echoed mockingly. Yet you keep a man of God at your side day and night. Do the Christians not frown on such arrangements? I serve as translator and advisor, Rorik responded evenly. My vows remain intact. For now, Torvald muttered, just loudly enough to be heard. The tension in the room thickened. Nyssa sensed they were being baited, tested to see how easily their composure might break. My answer to your proposal, she said, returning focus to Ragnar, is that I require time. Such decisions cannot be rushed if they are to endure. Time, Ragnar repeated, leaning back in his chair. A reasonable request. But know this, I am not a patient man, nor one accustomed to denial. I would expect nothing less from a Jarl of your reputation, she replied diplomatically. The rest of the meal passed in superficial conversation, though undercurrents of threat and calculation flowed beneath every word. When finally they were dismissed, both Nyssa and Rorik felt the relief of escaping a predator's den. He doesn't trust us, Rorik observed once they were alone in their quarters. Nor should he, Nyssa replied, checking that no one listened at their door. But he wants what I offer enough to postpone his suspicions. And Torvald is dangerous. He watches too closely. She paced the small room. We must accelerate our plans. Tomorrow night may be too late. Hegel expected 3 days to position all the warriors. We cannot wait. Decision formed in her mind. Send word to him tonight. We strike at tomorrow's feast, ready or not. Rorik nodded grimly. I'll find a way to get a message out. Be careful, she cautioned, genuine concern coloring her voice. If they catch you, or they won't. He moved toward her, closing the distance between them. Nyssa, if something goes wrong tomorrow, she placed her fingers against his lips, silencing him. Nothing will go wrong. By this time tomorrow, I will sit in my father's seat, and Ragnar's blood will water the earth. But even as she spoke with such certainty, doubt crept at the edges of her mind. So much could go awry, a misplaced word, a suspicious guard, a moment's hesitation. Rorik seemed to read her thoughts in her expression. Whatever happens, he said softly, capturing her hand in his, I am with you. Not as captive or advisor, but as? As what? She whispered when he faltered. Instead of answering with words, he leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. When she didn't, his lips met hers in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened with months of unspoken longing. Nyssa's arms wound around his neck, drawing him closer as something wild and urgent unfurled within her. This was madness, a Norse warrior woman and a Christian monk, on the eve of bloodshed, yet it felt more right than anything in the years since her family's death. When they finally parted, breathless, Rorik rested his forehead against hers. I should feel shame, he murmured. But I cannot find it in my heart. The gods put you in my path for a reason, she replied. Perhaps this is part of their design. Or gods. He smiled slightly. Our faiths may not be as far apart as we were taught. For that night, they set aside thoughts of vengeance and duty, finding in each other's arms a peace neither had known in years. Whatever the morrow might bring, they had this moment of connection amidst the storm. Dawn broke grey and cold, a light rain misting over Vestfold as if the gods themselves wept for what was to come. Nyssa rose early, leaving Rorik sleeping, and climbed to the highest point of their quarters where she could see beyond the settlement's walls. There, in the forests that ringed the northern approach, she caught the briefest flash of movement, a signal from Hagel that her warriors were in position, ready to strike when darkness fell. She allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction before returning inside to wake Rorik. The day would be one of careful preparation disguised as ordinary activities, inspecting trade goods, meeting with local merchants, all while memorizing guard positions and identifying potential allies within the settlement. Mid-morning found them in the marketplace, ostensibly examining amber from northern traders, when Torvald appeared at their side like a shadow made flesh. "My brother requests your presence," he said without preamble. "Alone," he added with a pointed look at Rorik. Alarm flashed through Nyssa, quickly suppressed. "Of course. Rorik, continue our business here. I shall return shortly." Rorik's expression remained neutral, but she read the concern in his eyes. With a slight nod that he should proceed with their contingency plans if she didn't return, she followed Torvald through the crowded marketplace. To her surprise, they didn't head toward the Great Hall, but instead toward the shipyard where Ragnar's finest vessel was being prepared for sea. "A beautiful ship," she commented as they approached the sleek longship with its dragon-headed prow. "New construction?" "Completed this spring," Torvald replied curtly. Ragnar named her Seawolf. At the ship, they found Ragnar inspecting the rigging, barking orders at the shipwrights. He turned as they approached, his expression unreadable. "Leave us," he commanded Torvald, who hesitated before obeying with obvious reluctance. When they were alone, Ragnar gestured for Nyssa to walk with him along the shore, away from prying ears. "You plan to kill me tonight," he said without preamble. Nyssa's heart lurched, but her face betrayed nothing. An unusual accusation to make against a guest. Not an accusation. A statement of fact. He stopped, turning to face her fully. "Your warriors hide in the northern forest. Your Christian sent a message to them last night, a message my men intercepted." I spread through Nyssa's veins, but she maintained her composure. "If you believe this, why not simply have me killed?" "Because you intrigue me." He studied her face with genuine curiosity. "You've built something in the south, something that could either strengthen or threaten Vestfold, depending on how we proceed. And how do you suggest we proceed, given your belief that I plot your death?" A slow smile spread across Ragnar's face, not cruel, but calculating. "I suggest we acknowledge the truth of our positions. You want vengeance for your family. I want your southern trade routes and alliances. Those seem incompatible goals. Perhaps. Or perhaps there is another path." He gestured toward the fjord beyond. "What if I were to leave Vestfold? Take my most loyal followers and establish a new settlement to the east, leaving you to reclaim your father's seat?" Suspicion flared in Nyssa's mind. "Why would you surrender power so easily?" "Because I am not a fool. I know how many remain loyal to your father's memory, how many resent my rule." His expression turned pragmatic. "I would rather retreat strategically than die gloriously." "And what would you ask in return for this strategic retreat?" "A formal alliance. Trading rights through your southern routes. And your word, sworn before the gods, that you will not seek my death once I depart." Nyssa weighed his words carefully. If true, this offered everything she sought without the bloodshed she had prepared for. Yet trust came difficult after years of nursing vengeance. "How do I know this isn't merely a ploy to lower my guard?" "You don't," he admitted. "Just as I don't know that you won't break your oath once I turn my back. We must each decide what risks we're willing to take for peace." The word hung between them, peace. Not a concept Nyssa had allowed herself to contemplate beyond the moment of her vengeance. "I need to consult with my advisors," she said finally. "Of course." Ragnar nodded. "But know this, my offer expires at sunset. After that, my men have orders to kill you, your Christian, and any warriors they find in the forest." With that ultimatum delivered, he strode away, leaving Nyssa alone with the weight of decision pressing upon her shoulders like a winter snow. She found Rorik waiting anxiously at their quarters, relief washing over his features as she entered unharmed. "Torvald took you away, I feared the worst," he said, embracing her briefly before stepping back to search her face. What happened? Nyssa related Ragnar's unexpected proposal, watching Rorik's expression shift from disbelief to cautious hope. Could it be genuine? He asked when she finished. I don't know. She paced the small room. It could be a trap, yet there was something in his manner, a practicality I hadn't expected. If it is genuine, it offers everything you sought without further bloodshed. Rorik moved to block her pacing, taking her hands in his. Isn't that worth considering? She looked down at their joined hands, his pale and ink-stained, hers calloused from sword and shield. 3 years I've lived for vengeance, Rorik. 3 years of planning, building alliances, strengthening myself for this moment. To set it aside now? Would not dishonor your family's memory, he finished gently. Vengeance satisfies for a moment. Building something lasting honors them eternally. His words echoed those her mother had spoken long ago, before illness had taken her to Helheim's mists. I need to speak with Hegel, she decided. He knew my father better than anyone still living. How? We're watched too closely to leave the settlement. Nyssa moved to the window, gazing toward the forest where her warriors waited. Then we must bring him to us. As darkness approached, Nyssa made her decision. Through a complex series of signals and a message delivered by a child too young to arouse suspicion, she had communicated with Hegel. His counsel, along with Rorik's, had helped clarify her path forward. The feast that night was subdued compared to the previous evening, fewer warriors present, an air of tension pervading the hall. Nyssa noted the strategic positioning of Ragnar's most loyal men near exits and at his back. Whatever his offer, he clearly prepared for treachery. When the initial courses had been served and the drinking horns filled, Ragnar rose from the high seat, silencing the hall with a raised hand. Tonight we honor not only our guests from the south, but also a decision that will shape Vestfold's future. His gaze swept the assembled crowd before settling on Nyssa. Nyssa Freysdottir has returned to claim her birthright. Murmurs rippled through the hall, some surprised, others satisfied, as if long-held suspicions were confirmed. After much consideration, Ragnar continued, I have decided to acknowledge her claim. Shock rippled visibly through the assembly. Torvald half rose from his seat, his face contorted in disbelief, before Ragnar's sharp glance settled him back into place. I and those loyal to me will depart for new lands to the east, where we will establish our own settlement. He raised his drinking horn. To Nyssa Freysdottir, daughter of Freyr, rightful Jarl of Vestfold. The toast was echoed with varying degrees of enthusiasm throughout the hall. Nyssa rose, her expression carefully composed as she raised her own horn in response. To Ragnar Paljason, whose wisdom in this matter benefits all our people. The feast continued with an undercurrent of bewilderment. Warriors and household members whispered among themselves, trying to comprehend this unexpected turn of events. Through it all, Nyssa maintained her poise, though her senses remained alert for any sign of treachery. Later, as the gathering began to disperse, Ragnar approached where she sat with Rorik. The arrangements are made, he said without preamble. My ships will be loaded by morning tide. I take 40 of my most loyal warriors and their families, along with my share of Vestfold's treasury. As agreed, Nyssa confirmed. There is one more matter. His gaze shifted to Rorik. The Christian. Rorik tensed beside her, but Nyssa laid a calming hand on his arm. What of him? His presence here raises questions. A Jarl with a Christian advisor is unusual. The world changes, she replied, echoing their earlier conversation. Those who adapt survive. Ragnar studied them both for a long moment. So I see. Very well. He extended his arm in the warrior's greeting. Until morning, then. As he walked away, Torvald approached, his expression dark with barely contained fury. You surrender everything we've built for this girl and her pet priest, he hissed at Ragnar. I choose life and opportunity over death and defeat, Ragnar replied calmly. You would be wise to do the same. Their voices faded as they moved away, leaving Nyssa and Rorik in momentary privacy. Do you trust him? Rorik asked quietly. No, she admitted. But I trust his self-interest. He knows he cannot hold Vestfold against both my warriors and the discontent within. Then by this time tomorrow, I will sit in my father's seat, she finished, and the real work begins. The night passed without incident, though neither Nyssa nor Rorik slept deeply, both alert for the sound of approaching treachery. By first light, they stood at Vestfold's harbour watching as Ragnar's ships were loaded with goods, people, and the agreed-upon portion of the settlement's wealth. Hegel and a contingent of Nyssa's warriors had entered the settlement at dawn, positioning themselves carefully throughout, ready to respond if Ragnar's peaceful departure proved false. As the morning sun burned away the mist, Ragnar approached Nyssa on the dock. He had exchanged his Jarl's finery for more practical travelling attire, though gold still gleamed at his wrists. "The tide turns," he said, gesturing to where his 3 ships waited at anchor. "It is time." "Safe journey," Nyssa replied formally. "May the winds favour your sails." "And yours." He studied her face one last time. "You are more your mother's daughter than your father's, I think." She too understood that survival sometimes requires setting aside old ways. Before Nyssa could respond to this unexpected insight, Ragnar turned and strode toward the waiting boat that would carry him to his ship. Torvald followed, shooting one final venomous glance over his shoulder. They watched in silence as the longships raised their striped sails and moved slowly out into the fjord, carrying away the man who had ended her family and nearly ended her. "It feels unfinished," she confessed to Rorik, who stood at her side. "Perhaps that is the nature of peace," he replied. "It lacks the finality of violence, but offers something violence cannot." "And what is that?" "Possibility." As Ragnar's ships disappear beyond the headland, Nyssa turned to face the settlement, her settlement now. Already people were gathering, curious and uncertain about their future under a woman's leadership. With Rorik at her right hand and Hegel at her left, she walked toward the great hall where her father's high seat awaited. Each step felt heavy with significance, with the weight of all that had come before and all that might yet be. Inside, the hall fell silent as she entered. Warriors, household members, and visiting merchants watched with expressions ranging from hope to skepticism as she crossed to the high seat. For a moment, she simply stood before it, remembering her father who had sat there, who had taught her the meaning of leadership and honor. Then, with a deep breath, she took her place, feeling the smooth wood beneath her hands, worn by generations of Jarls before her. "People of Vestfold," she began, her voice clear and steady. "Today marks not an ending, but a beginning. For too long, our people have turned their blades against one another while the world changes around us." She gestured to where Rorik stood. "This man was once my captive, then my advisor, and now stands as my equal. In him, I found wisdom from a world different from our own, wisdom that can help us forge a new path." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but she continued undaunted. "We will maintain our strength and our traditions, but we will also build bridges where others have built walls. Our ships will carry not just warriors seeking plunder, but traders seeking prosperity that benefits all." She rose from the seat, her gaze sweeping across the assembled crowd. "Those who wish to follow the old path may join Ragnar to the east. Those who seek something new, a future where we are known not just for our strength in battle but for our wisdom in peace, I welcome you to remain." For a moment, silence held the hall in its grip. Then, from the back, a voice called out, "To Jarl Nyssa." The cry was taken up by others, spreading through the hall like fire through dry timber until the rafters seemed to shake with it. Nyssa remained standing, accepting their acclaim with dignity rather than triumph. Her eyes found Rorik's across the crowded space, and in that moment of connection, she saw not just the present but a future unfolding before them, one neither could have imagined when fate first brought them together on that blood-soaked monastery floor. Later, as the celebration continued around them, they stood together on the cliff overlooking the fjord, watching the last light of day paint the water gold. "What comes next?" Rorik asked, his shoulder brushing against hers. "Building," she replied simply. "Healing the wounds Ragnar left. Establishing new trade routes. Preparing for the changes we both know are coming. And us?" The question hung between them, freighted with possibility. Nyssa turned to face him fully. You are no longer bound to me as captive or advisor. If you wish to return to your monastery, I don't, he interrupted firmly. My place is here now. With you. Even though I am a heathen. A smile touched her lips. Even though you are the most stubborn woman I have ever encountered, he countered, drawing her into his arms. Heathen or not. Their lips met as the sun slipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land that was now hers to protect and transform. In that kiss was a promise, not just between a man and woman, but between two worlds that had for too long seen each other only through the lens of conflict. The warrior queen had taken her throne, and everything, indeed, had changed.